Frankenstein. Made back in 1931, starring the legendary actor Boris Karloff. This legendary film is also directed by James Whale, who is also responsible for making the sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein, later on. Now, this film is completely different from the original book that was written by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley back in the 19th century. When Shelley's book was first published in 1821, it became such an enormous success that it suddenly spawned stage plays and musicals. 89 years later, a film company called Thomas Edison Films actually had the first attempt at making the Frankenstein story adapted to the silver screen. This version of Frankenstein was also completely different from the original story. Most of the stage plays throughout the 19th century showed the creature being brought to life through electricity. However, in this first movie adaptation, the creature is brought to life by a boiling cauldron. The monster was played by an actor named Charles Ogle. The 1910 version of Frankenstein was the first horror movie to ever be made for the big screen, and I still consider it till this day as a masterpiece. Back to the 1931 version of the movie. This was made by a director named James Whale, who was actually a really talented director at the time. The gothic style and cinematography that he brought to this film were amazing, even though you can tell one of the night sky backdrops was fake. This film starred British actor Colin Clive as Dr. Henry Frankenstein. Dwight Frye played his hunchback assistant Fritz. Now, what's interesting in the original story is that Mary Shelley never wrote in Frankenstein having an assistant because he worked alone. Frankenstein's lab assistant Fritz was created in a stage play later on in the 19th century. Years later, in another stage play adaptation, they would give him the name Igor. In this movie adaptation, the director decided to use the name Fritz, and I'm glad that he used it ever since. During this time, not many people could handle the kind of content that was shown on the big screen. So before the film started, actor Edward Van Sloan came out to give everybody a fair warning about it. What you will see may shock you. It may horrify you. Now, if you wish to leave now, well, we warned you. The film starts out in a cemetery where a funeral is being held, overlooked by the statue of the Grim Reaper. Dr. Frankenstein and his assistant Fritz are hiding, waiting nearby until the funeral party leaves and the body is buried, and that's when Frankenstein and his assistant get to work and go dig up the grave. During this scene, Henry throws a pile of dirt onto the statue of the Grim Reaper, signifying that he's the conqueror of death. After this, and after retrieving a brain, they haul the body back up to Dr. Frankenstein's watchtower, and that's where they both get to work. Meanwhile, Dr. Frankenstein's fiancée, Elizabeth, and his friend Victor have become worried about him and want to go see him immediately, both of whom are played by Mae Clark and John Bowles. But first, they seek help from Dr. Wildman, played by Edward Van Sloan. Dr. Wildman tells them both that Henry, his old student, would not let them visit him willingly because he's gone a little mad recently. But of course, Elizabeth insists upon seeing Henry, and so they all three agree to go see him in the watchtower together. Henry, of course, is frustrated by Dr. Wildman, Victor, and Elizabeth coming to try and interrupt his work, but he lets them in to come see his work anyway. The scene that follows is one of the most memorable moments in the history of film. The electrical apparatus is running to its fullest potential, the monster is hoisted up into the sky with a thunder and lightning flashing around, and then before you know it, it's brought back down to the ground again. Who cannot forget Colin Clive's memorable speech? Oh, it's alive, it's alive, it's alive, it's alive! Little known fact back in that time, after Dr. Frankenstein's little speech, is that religious groups had the lines, "In the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God," removed because it was blasphemous. After a few days, everything that Dr. Frankenstein didn't expect to go wrong with his creation actually went wrong, just like his professor warned him. After barely escaping death from Henry Frankenstein, the monster suddenly gets loose and starts terrorizing the countryside. The monster terrorizes poor Elizabeth, and that persuades her fiancé, Henry Frankenstein, to join the town's angry mob and go out into the countryside and destroy his creation. But the monster catches up to him and takes Henry up to a windmill near the top of a countryside. Another fact about this scene, that while actor Boris Karloff was dragging Colin Clive up the steps inside the windmill, the poor guy suffered from a few back injuries and has been paralyzed a little ever since. Of course, Henry escapes, the monster looks like he gets destroyed, and this film looks like it results to a very happy ending. Later on, this would leave it open to the classic sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, where the story was left off. I loved every moment of this original cinema classic, and it rightly deserves a 10 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Let me know in the comments below what movie you'd like me to review next. Be sure to give me a like and subscribe, and I will catch you later. Stay tuned to my following horror movie reviews.